to this episode of the Architects of Destiny podcast with our very special guest, Jaclyn Michelle. Today, we are going to talk about human design. Jaclyn is a reader and a blogger, and she shares her knowledge and a very, very special approach to human design. So if you have dabbled with human design but maybe got discouraged, or perhaps you are curious what the buzz is all about, tune in and we will provide as much information as we possibly can in this short space of time so you can understand your design, your soul's purpose, and your natural abilities through the lenses of human design. Welcome to the show, Jaclyn.
Hi, good to see you again.
Yeah, Jaclyn has provided me with a couple of amazing readings. I'm going to do another one, but human design is one of these things that I believe can complement our personal spiritual growth. But let's start from scratch, Jaclyn. What is actually human design?
So human design is considered a channeled system. It was channeled in the late 80s, and the guy that channeled it basically kind of was on a spiritual journey. He basically hit that wall I think a lot of us hit in our life with what am I doing? Why am I doing it? What's the meaning of it all? But because of just the way that I guess like the economy was at the time and just being a dude, he was able to quit his job, leave his family, go on this worldwide spiritual quest. And when he was traveling, he was studying with different spiritual practitioners. He was working with different metaphysical teachers. I also heard he was doing a little plant medicine, little psilocybin, little DMT. Basically, he had that breath and space and time to explore, to marinate in these different practices. And then he ended up in Ibiza in Spain, and he had this 8-day download, which was the human design system. So it pulls from 4 ancient wisdom traditions that by themselves are amazing, groundbreaking, just really rich spiritual practices. But human design actually combines all 4 of them together. So it pulls from the chakras from the Hindu Brahmin tradition. It pulls from the I Ching, which is really important to like Buddhist, Taoist, Confucian, different traditions, and from the Chinese. Pulls from Western astrology, and it pulls from Kabbalah's Tree of Life from Jewish mysticism. So it actually finds a way to bring all of those 4 wisdom traditions together into one coherent system that helps us. It provides us with a map of how our energy kind of moves and flows. So how we impact other people, how other people impact us, just on that energetic vibrational level.
Great explanation, but I've got a more personal question. What got you started on this human design journey? Because you've had a successful career for a number of years, and then, well, you decided to leave it all, start a blog, and then eventually you actually started doing readings as well, which you're continuing to do now, and you're also educating. So what made you shift and take interest in this practice?
Yeah. So when I left college, I joined a nonprofit here in the United States where I was teaching in a low income community. And I started off in education, and I did like all of the things I was quote unquote supposed to do as, a person entering their first career. I was like taking the promotions and stepping into like whatever was the next step for me. But I was super inherently unhappy. And like flash forward, I spent 15 years in K-12 education, and where there are parts of it that were incredibly fulfilling, the more quote unquote successful I got, just based on like capitalism's, I guess, version of success, the more miserable I was, the more disconnected I felt from my own spirituality, my own purpose, my own just integrity. And finally, I ended up having this massive autoimmune crash. Basically, like my body was in this fight or flight, like adrenal just storm for so many years that it just kind of decided, like it pulled the emergency brake and was like, you need to stop. I mean, I look back and I'm like, I can't believe I thought working 80 hours a week was like sustainable and normal. No, absolutely not. So I quit. And I actually at that point in time, like really didn't know what was going to come next. I didn't know if I was going to step back into education or what I was going to do. And so I wanted something that would help me connect back to who I was, because literally when I left my corporate job, because that's kind of, I ended up started in public service and ended up in the private sector. I remember looking in the mirror and just like not recognizing myself and feeling super disconnected from like me. And I was like, well, I need to figure out something that's going to bring me back to that. And that's how I discovered human design. When I was a little kid, I was the one in the metaphysical section of the library, like taking out books on like astrology and astral projection. So like I kind of just dipped back into my spiritual toolkit and was like, what can I utilize to find myself again? So when I found human design, literally I was using it as a system to figure out what's my next step. Like, how do I start making decisions that are more in my integrity, more aligned with who I am, like better informed, that are going to be more successful. And once I realized the wisdom this system had for us and how, just the variety and of information that was out there, I was like, I want to share this with people. This is transformative. I want to help people transform their lives. And so it actually turned into this being the thing that I ended up doing. It was like not what I intended, but it's a beautiful surprise.
How awesome. It was similar for me when I was going through the breakdown of my previous business and my whole identity, in fact. When I was trying to find answers to what went wrong, that sent me on the whole discovery of the business energetics and the tools that I'm using today to help my clients. I think very often our dark night of the soul actually leads us to the very purpose. And well, isn't that by design, actually?
It is. It's actually our incarnation cross. Like a lot of folks, that's written into our purpose for being on the planet, which in human design is called our incarnation cross. Like sometimes we have to like go through that thing really personally, deeply, intensely, and then we walk out on the other side. And that's specifically the medicine we're supposed to help other folks with.
Awesome. So I think this gives us a bit of an explanation of what human design is and what it can do to you personally on a more general level. But of course, not everybody here will become a human design practitioner or reader. However, for no matter who you are and what you do, it can be a very helpful tool. The only thing is, it seems a bit complicated when you first plot your chart. And I'm sure that perhaps there's some of you listening to this and it's like, okay, I've seen all these numbers and squiggles and all these kind of like lines and what the heck? And there's the whole, terminology as well that comes with it. Where would you get started with this entire system if you're a complete newbie?
Well, that's actually part of why I built my blog to begin with, because one of the things I found was at the time, back when I first started studying it, everything was in books. There wasn't a lot online. And every once in a while, you'd hear someone talking about it on a podcast, but I was like, I need a click path. Someone give me like, click here first, then go here. So I actually built something on my website. So if you go to interiorcreature.com and go to the little tab at the top that says new to human design, I've literally given you a click path so you can research the things in your chart. But absent that, say you're not into that. When you run it, I would say the first thing I would start researching is in the chart properties section, it'll list something called your type. And the type basically comes from the way your centers are configured. And the centers are all those shapes in the chart. So when you pull your chart, you see this graphic that's got triangles and squares and diamonds, and some are colored in and some aren't. Those are called the centers. And the centers, basically, it's a map of, again, how our energy is impacting other people and where other people's energy can impact us. And so the way those centers are configured determines something called a type. So the type is actually gives you a ton of really good information. It lets you know, because a catch to every type is a strategy for decision making. And then a part of your body you're supposed to listen to as like your intuitive voice to make that decision. So absent anything else, I always tell people start with your type, understand your strategy, practice listening to your authority, and see all the shifts that'll give you in your life. And then if you're interested from there, because I guarantee you, like you'll start noticing more alignment and things happening. You're like, oh my God, I wouldn't have thought to listen to that part of myself. Then I would encourage people to go into their centers and start looking at, well, where am I open? And where am I really sensitive to other people's energy? And where am I closed? Where am I maybe not honoring what the message my body is trying to send me? Just that, like going through those 9 centers alone can just provide so many epiphanies for like where you've been ignoring yourself and maybe not even realizing yourself abandoning, or where like, you're just really empathic and sensitive to other people's stuff.
So let's kind of dive a little bit into this strategy and authority, and because that's like a buzzword in human design, but what it links to, it seems like we have in our modern society completely disconnected from the signals that come from outside of our mind and brain. And I feel like what human design does, it kind of refers us back to the wisdom of our body. And of course, we have been conditioned so heavily to rely on our mind to make logical decisions. However, when I look at my life and following my intuition has never got me wrong. Actually, not following my intuition have caused me to pay a really, really hefty price many times before I've realized, okay, I'm gonna tune into my intuition. But intuition, sometimes when we kind of discuss it in spiritual circles, and seems this kind of very immaterial thing. However, human design kind of gives a different spin on it because it's a very concrete way of how our body talks to us. So can you talk us through maybe how different types of human design, well, personalities like get those decisions from outside of the mind and what to do with it?
Yeah. So one of my favorite kind of premises of human design is we want to try to drop out of the brain and into the body, because you're absolutely right. We've been conditioned to almost be overly logical and overly rational and overly like, I mean, even as a kid, like think back to when maybe your parents modeled decision making for you. Mine were wonderful. I love my parents, but they definitely didn't say to me, "Okay, I want you to like feel into your core and figure out what you have physical energy for." Like, no, they were like, "Make a pros and cons list," or they had a lot of pragmatic advice. But our brains are so flexible; we can talk ourselves in or out of almost anything. So, what human design is exactly what you said. It's we've been a neck down species for a lot longer than we've been a neck up species in terms of just cognitive development. So, let's like tap back into the body's natural intuition. So what's cool about running your human design chart is it gives you a map to what your specific intuition feels like, and everybody's is a little bit different. So on your chart it'll be listed as your authority, and there's, I believe, 9 different types of authority, or 7 or 9 different types of authority that we can have. I always forget the number. But we can basically, your emotions can guide your decision making, your physical energy can guide your decision making, your sense of like safety could guide your decision making, your integrity might guide your decision making. Your integrity might work with your sense of desire and commitment together to decide for yourself or to guide your decision making. Maybe it's just your desire. For some people, it's literally what is logical. There's a very small percentage of people who are what we call mental projectors, where they actually have to rely on their intellect because nothing below their neck is defined in their chart. And then there are reflectors who have their charts completely open. So they have to like really allow the moon to transit all of these different placements in their chart. But different types can have almost all of the different types of authorities. Like there are some that are specific to different types. But what human design basically does is it pairs that intuitive personal voice with something called a strategy that is consistent through your type. So, like for example, in my chart, I'm something called a sacral generator. When I go to make a decision, because I'm a generator, like all other generators, we're told we're supposed to wait to respond to make a decision. And what that basically means is I need to check in with my sacral, because that's my authority, and wait till I have a clear yes or no from my body saying, "Ooh, is this something you're going to be able to get to give your energy to? Or is it something you have to give your energy to?" And like once I've got that clear reaction from my body, then I can take action and respond. So it's basically most of us, except for manifestors, most types had the word wait in their strategy. We're supposed to honor our body's messages prior to taking action. The only type that's different are pure manifestors. They actually figure out what works for them through doing it. So their body actually kind of, they'll say they get an idea or an impulse, they'll start walking toward it. And they're something called a signature and a not self theme in our charts. They'll start feeling either like things are really peaceful and moving really slow, like smoothly, and they'll keep walking toward the thing, or they'll feel anger. Like they feel like they're blocked from the thing or restricted or restrained in some way, and they'll stop doing it. So for all everyone's, that's the kind of the most, I think, fruitful thing to look at first is literally, what is my strategy? What part of my body is supposed to be talking to me, and am I honoring and listening to that? Because just like you, when I look back retroactively at a lot of the choices I made back when I was in corporate and back when I was in education, especially like career decisions, I was making because someone else told me it was the next step, not because I was getting that sacral, ooh, this is something I get to go do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is a really interesting point. I think for everybody, and sometimes it's actually honoring that voice of the body in the same way as we honor the voice of our mind. And I think the more we delve into our spiritual development, the easier it becomes. I think it's just getting to know actually how this sounds, because that voice can be a squeeze in your stomach. This voice can be excitement, like a fluttery kind of feeling in your belly. And how would you advise that we get to know this voice? Like, what is there any specific practices or techniques to develop that, well, body intelligence or intuition or
Yeah,
instinct?
yeah, I think it's difficult because I think, again, when you think about trauma and conditioning, because in human design, one of the big things we talk a lot about is the story we've written about ourselves that we've co-authored with other people without even realizing it. A lot of the reason that we're so disconnected from our body comes from that conditioning we've experienced since childhood. And some of it's really great and some of it's not so great. And some of it was well intentioned and some of it was not. But I think a lot of times, and again, if you add trauma into the mix too, there are people who are very disconnected from their body's messages just in general. And so I think first is having some sort of embodiment practice that you do on a regular basis, whether it's breath work, meditation, yoga. There's like so many different ones that just anchor you back into like, what is my body trying to tell me? And then as you're researching your specific authority, like pay attention to how it's described as feeling. A lot of times the good resources will give you a range of different descriptions. Like for example, splenic authority. Folks with splenic authority, their spleen, literally, and again, not necessarily literally the organ, but the feeling it gives you is that adrenal fight or flight response. And so some people, if it's a splenic, yes, will get like the butterflies, they'll get a red face, they'll feel flushed, but it's like it's like excited adrenaline, right? Some people get it really subtly. Some people get like they're beet red and they're leaning forward. You know, the splenic no could be that flight response that you feel like heart in your shoes, hollow knees, get the heck out of here kind of feeling. Um, Even though spleen's not my authority, I have my spleen defined, so I feel it. I feel like a hard knot in the pit of my stomach. But again, it was one of those things that upon studying my chart and digging in and reading about splenic authority, I realized how many times my body had tried to tell me this person isn't safe, or this person's not all they seem, or this situation's a little iffy. And I had that pit in my stomach present and I ignored it. And again, like normally to my detriment, like you were saying earlier. So one of the things I would almost recommend everyone doing, because each center that could be an authority presents a little bit differently, is to kind of read about what that should feel like and then start subtly noticing it. Like start kind of almost like putting your hand on that zone in your body when you go to make a decision. Like I always tell myself, projectors, like put your hand on your chest. Like notice where you're feeling expansion, where you're feeling contraction. All my sacral generators, I'm like, put your hand on your belly button. Like, do you feel a rush of energy? Do you feel a sense of dread? And like once our body starts realizing we're listening, it'll actually start speaking louder. It's almost like when you have it's almost like a teenager that's a little passive aggressive. That's like, well, if you're not listening, I'm not going to speak to you. It's like we have to kind of get her to know that we're listening and like she'll turn the volume back up. So
That's a great thing. It's like turning the tap on. Okay, yeah, you've got space, and now you can tell me, and it's. I think they're also a great practice, and I've discussed it with one of the other guests of this podcast, Mary-Briggs, and we were talking about channeling and intuition and listening to our spirit guides. And one of the things that Marie said, which stuck with me, is that sometimes it's good to practice these kind of decision-making processes in small decisions. It doesn't have to be straight away in like, shall I move to another country or shall I ditch my job? Maybe just start with something as small as, I don't know, do I
what do I
take
want
this
for lunch?
invitation?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Do I go
or
have coffee with this person? Do I buy
yes.
this blouse? Yeah, absolutely. Like, and then once I think the body, once it starts realizing you're listening, it's going to start speaking louder. So when you go to make that massive decision, you have a very clear in your body, like intuitive signal.
Superb. I think that's really sound advice, and I recommend you guys do a bit of exercise and practice. And every decision can be a really great opportunity to develop this intuition muscle, because it is like a muscle that develops, that just kind of grows stronger and stronger. And then like I've got quite an easy job because all my centers are connected and they speak in one voice, which, by the way, I've learned from from the reading with Jackie. But what I've kind of not I've always had that. It's just I didn't listen. But now what I'm doing is like, oh, every time there is a decision, I was okay, it's an opportunity to exercise it in small and big things. So I really highly recommend that practice, as I feel like it's also human design is something to be embodied, and it's not just like, okay, I'm gonna have a reading and that's it. I think you can dive deeper and deeper into it, right?
Oh,
And anything.
absolutely. Yeah, it's meant to be, it's literally called in the text an experiment because they know that once you start trying these things on, like I mean, getting a reading is fantastic because like when you have your chart mirrored back to you, it does feel like someone holding up a really beautiful mirror that's really accurate and holistic and you're like, I feel really seen. And that's beautiful in and of itself, but like once you start putting those things into practice and experimenting with it is just like, oh my goodness, how did I ever live a different way? Like, why was I ever not using these to make decisions? It can bring a lot of alignment. So yeah, it's called an experiment. So play around with it. Yeah.
I want to touch on another aspect of human design, and this is actually what brought me to your blog and to your reading, which is, of course, there are some great things in our human design, but there is also things that we may discover that feel literally like a life sentence. So I've got
Mhm.
this profile of 3/5, and that, when I read it, first of all, it was scarily accurate. So, and then I also read my husband's profile, and I could see, okay, this system is scarily accurate. And I've studied Chinese metaphysics and I Ching and all of that, so I know it's on sound foundations. But even so, I was like, okay, this is definitely the the right thing. It is accurate, so I don't doubt that. But then I've read of basically the story of my life, 3/5, and even the names of these profiles.
Oh,
Of
the martyr
martyr,
heretic.
yeah, martyr
Yeah.
and heretic. I was like, goodness me, that's like, it doesn't get worse worse
It
than that,
sounds
because
awful.
yeah. And then I read about it, and it felt literally like a life sentence where I'm meant to fail and fail forward and fail better, but it just means that in my life there's a constant failure, and I've experienced that very painful in business. But then not just that, but this other kind of number 5 profile is like, oh my goodness me, not just that I fail, but when I fail, everybody's going to be looking and poking fun at me and being very disappointed because they all project onto me. And this is exactly what happened in my life. I'm like, I don't want to go over this again. So, okay, I've got this knowledge. I know that this is a potential that is in my birth. Can I get out of this cycle? And then you start reading most of the human design blogs, and they say, this is your lot, take it or leave it. But it didn't feel right. And then I started reading your approach, which is slightly different. So if you can just explain a little bit about, what is it actually when you read, and certain things are accurate, but at the same time, they're quite off putting.
Yeah, it's hard because I think one of the things human design kind of focuses on to kind of zoom out is this idea of a global cycle. And just like in astrology, how we're supposed to be stepping out of the age of Pisces and into the age of Aquarius, human design kind of terms that as stepping out of the old paradigm into the new paradigm. And when this system was channeled in 1987, it was a very different world. And the guy that channeled the system, Robert Allen Krakauer, he goes by Ra Uru, who that's like his kind of human design name, if you will. His transmission of the system is very blunt and it's very like specific. And I think that as his one of the things I personally noticed, and other people might disagree with me on this, but one of the things I noticed was that he started getting a little bit more rigid and a little bit more negative in the way he would talk about things as like he got closer and closer to when he died, unfortunately. As the system, I think, gained popularity, and I'm sure you've heard the saying, like with absolute power comes sometimes absolute corruption, and it's something like that. I know I'm riffing on a absolute power corrupts absolutely. That's the thought.
Mhm.
But I feel like that power may have gotten to him a little bit toward the end. That's just my personal take. I don't know him. I didn't know him personally, but It's never resonated with me, those really specific negative fatalistic. And when you start reading other teachers, people who he's trained, other folks in the system who are like really familiar with the system, you start noticing more new paradigm transmissions of it that are centered in heart, centered in growth, centered in compassion and empathy and kindness. And that was the transmission of human design that spoke to me. And one of the things I noticed when I went through my own kind of experiment, as I'm still going through it, is that when you notice yourself, and what Richard Rudd, who's he studied human design under Robert Allen Krakauer, he has his own system called the Gene Keys, which is like built on the foundation of human design. One of the things Richard talks about is the shadow of every placement that we have in our chart, and how shadow is just like what we would call almost like a 3D vibration of these aspects of our energy. We're either choosing self but to the detriment of other people, or we're choosing other people to the detriment of self. And the shadow expression might be where we come into that gates energy, or that placement's energy, but it definitely doesn't need to be where we stay, and it doesn't need to be where we end. And so he talks about the gift and then the city of the energy as well. And I like to think of it as like 3D to 4D to 5D. We're kind of like moving up into our higher vibrational spaces. And the energy of the new paradigm is supposed to be this energy of like miracles and love and compassion and kindness and like self and other balanced. And we get there by embodying the gift. And so my reading of human design, I look at this like lens of everything in the chart with, okay, what are the challenges, the 3D challenges that we might face if we're living in fear, scarcity, lack, those kind of low vibrational energies through our conditioning, through our experiences. But then how do we step out of that and into something more loving, more compassionate, more empathic, more kind, more new paradigm? And like, what does that ascension kind of look like? And so that personally, to me, when I see readings, for example, of that martyr heretic profile, you're absolutely right. Every reading I read about it was like, oh, this is horrible. And I'm a 1-3. And so I had that same martyr energy in my chart. I'm like, I don't want to keep failing over and over again. That sounds terrible. But when you read about it through the lens of the new paradigm, it's no, I have to get my hands dirty and try things out to understand them. And I can choose better if I start doing a postmortem on every choice that I make. What worked, what didn't, why? Okay, let me integrate that and choose better next time. So the failures are, it's like tripping down one step as opposed to falling down an entire flight every time. It's like we catch ourselves and we're able to adjust a lot faster. But again, that's just my personal interpretation of like, and I personally resonate with those new paradigm transmissions of the system that are rooted more in growth.
This episode is brought to you by the Quantum Club. The Quantum Club is a membership program designed to help you develop your spiritual abilities, such as connecting to your galactic soul family as guides, speaking light languages, channeling, transmitting and receiving light technology. Every week we hold live sessions and work with you energetically on a deeper level to unlock your divine intuitive gifts, to connect deeper than ever before with your higher self and galactic light beings. To find out more, head to bit.ly/galactic club. That's bit.ly/galactic club. See you there.
It's just because there's other transmissions, for example, the Hawkins scale of consciousness, which says that, only very small percentage of people ever reach those higher vibrations and enlightenments. Do you think that it's just a testimony of how much we are evolving as a human race? That, in 1987, I was born in 86, so, when I was a baby, the world was a different place. The world was, we still have low vibrational qualities in our society, and I think some of them are even coming to light more, but at the same time we are evolving as a species. And does that mean that basically if we stayed course how humanity was, and maybe if we also stayed course as individuals within the society, well, that these potentials will come to their lower vibrational expression, or like Richard Rudd says, the shadow. However, if we transcend it, and if we actually develop and tune into this strategy, tune into that intuition, then we almost have a chance to kind of tap into the higher realm, to the higher expression of the same, gate, gene, or whatever.
Yeah, it's hard. I think in 87, we weren't as interconnected with each other as we are now. Because 87, even though the internet was a thing, it wasn't as ubiquitous as it is. And so in 1987, like we were exchanging energy with people when we were either on a landline telephone with them or we were physically in their, proximity. You and I are exchanging energy right now. I mean, you're in Costa Rica, I'm in Arizona in the United States. We're exchanging energy. I don't think that Krakauer could have anticipated how interconnected we all are. And I think with all of you know, I think the interconnectivity has done two things. I think it's made us kind of in each other's energy more often than we are solely in our own, which is ample opportunities to learn lessons through gates, through placements we don't normally have. What's kind of cool is when we're around someone who has something closed we have open in human design, they close it for us temporarily. So every time I'm around someone who's got like a center closed or a gate closed that I don't, they're activating that for me. So it's an opportunity to grow. It's an opportunity to practice. So we're so saturated in each other's energy that I think we're being pushed, right? In
Mhm.
ways we may not have been pushed before, in a good way. I think of it as like a catalyst, right?
Mhm.
But then there's also this awareness now because we're so interconnected, conversations that wouldn't be happening. Like human design is having a moment right now because of platforms. And again, for all their good and ill, like YouTube, like Instagram, like TikTok. Like there are kids doing TikTok dances to like talk about the centers these days. And it's like we have access to information that I don't think we would have back when crack, and I was a baby as well at that time. I was born in 83, so I was like a little toddling 4-year-old at the time. But I don't know if you could have anticipated. So I think almost this interconnection to connectedness plus this like access to information, it's catalyzing our awareness. It's opening things in us that maybe we wouldn't have realized before. That's now allowing this, because it's our conscious engagement with these parts of ourselves, these shadowy parts, and making that decision to choose differently, to tap into love, to, though that's what's I think helping us get more people, I think, raise their consciousness on that scale, or at least have the opportunity
Beautiful.
to.
Beautiful. So, how do you think actually this human design system helps us evolve as humanity? Because of course it is a very individual thing, and it's like, yeah, this is your soul design, this is your like blueprint, and people have individual readings, individual charts, and we all it's so detailed, so different. But where does it play on this global picture of humanity consciousness, like raising up and changing?
So in human design, it looks a lot at this idea of polarity. And again, Rudd talks about that as the shadow, where we're either making decisions to the detriment of other people because we're glorifying the self. He calls that the reactive. Or we're glorifying other people, but to the detriment of the self. He calls that the repressive. Both of those vibrations are rooted in fear and scarcity, et cetera. And a lot of us don't even realize those become our default settings based on, just conditioning and what's been modeled for us or our own trauma or our own experiences. And one of the things I appreciate, it's taking that active contemplative spiritual practice, which is the I Ching, and it's using that as a tool to say, let's stop and take energy as like a big just like, nebulous thing. And it breaks it down into these 64 different little compartments of energy and says, let's look at them individually and let's look at your specific connection to this energy. Like, what has your past behaviors been? When you were a kid, when you were a young adult, when you were a teenager, when you were, what are your patterns been? And are those patterns serving you? And are they serving the people around you? And human design's one of its basic premises is like, I guess the idea of if you've ever been on a flight where they're like, put your oxygen mask on first and that'll help the person next to you. It's this idea of we can't pour from an empty cup. And if we can show up in the world in our integrity, satisfied, aligned, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, we're going to be much better at helping other people. I think up to this point, systems like capitalism, et cetera, have had us, the employer is the most thing, or the goal of the project is the most important. And a lot of time it's to the detriment of ourselves. A lot of us have been engaged in self-abandonment practices, or we've overcorrected and then veered into like self-aggrandizing practices. And human design's like, we got to split the balance. We got to find that middle ground so you can show up better for your community, but as a whole, happy, healthy human as well. So it's through this active contemplation that we get there.
Beautiful. You've mentioned contemplation. That was actually my next question, because you also mentioned the gene keys. How do these two systems interrelate? I know that Rudd was the student of the founder of the human design, and that the gene keys are meant to be contemplated. So of course these two, where would if, because people can come from different sides. Some people come from human design and then they discover gene keys, or the other way around. But how do gene keys play into human design? Because I know that you actually utilize both.
Yeah. So in human design, we have 64 what are called gates, and the gates correlate directly to the 64 hexagrams of the I Ching. So it takes that core lesson from whatever Confucian, Taoist, Buddhist kind of translation of it and distills it into this like aspect of our energy in human design. In human design, when Robert Allen Krakauer channeled the system, for every gate, he gave a specific thing called an exaltation and a detriment for each placement. And they were very, again, because Robert Allen Krakauer's language is very direct and it's very like concrete. It could be a little harsh. Like I remember the first time I read it, like my incarnation cross, though you have to know about me, is my incarnation cross is all about compassion. And that's just the lens through which I view everything. And I looked at these like exaltations and detriments and went, that sounds like a death sentence. That sounds like, you're sentenced to hard time. You're either good at it or you're not. It felt too old paradigm black and white to me. Well, I feel like it felt that way to Rudd as well, as my assumption, because what Richard Rudd basically did was he took those same 64 gates. He calls them gene keys, though. It's like a tomato kind of thing. Like it's the same thing. And he basically said, these are not death sentences. You can actively contemplate and raise your frequency and your vibration by interrupting some of those patterns that aren't serving you, by turning that, like, having that ability to be like, engage in honest self-scrutiny, really be honest with yourself about how have I been behaving? Where have my choices been coming from? Is that serving me? Is it serving others? And what happens if I choose differently? And it just interrupts that autopilot, that's the point. That's why it really vibrated and resonated with me. It's also anchored in quantum physics and a lot of Buddhist practices, which I'm a nerd. I love the holographic universe. Like I'm a big reader. And I mean, I don't understand all of it, but every time I read something, I'm like, oh my God, that rings so true. And I love Buddhist philosophy. So I also think that's why his version his transmission really resonated with me. It gives you all something active to do with it as well. So it's just a different vehicle. Now that I'm steeped in gene keys, you're going to laugh. Lately, I've been going back to Robert Allen Krakauer's original exaltation and detriment and going, now I get why he framed it this way. I think when I first read it, though, it felt very like, that seems really negative. But now I get a little bit why. I needed to kind of go in through one door to get back to where I started, if that makes sense.
Awesome. But when you get your chart and you've got all these numbers that signify all these gates or gene keys, how could you go about contemplating? You just read about the two polarities and
what I basically did for my own was I started objectively, right? And I actually have a webinar that's free on my website, and I can share the link with your listeners as well, where I walk you through this specific process. But the first thing I do is I think about it objectively. So for example, I have gate 21, hexagram 21, gene key 21, whatever you want to call it. The number at least doesn't change. And it's all about our relationship to control. That's one of the gates I have in my chart. So instead of thinking about me, my own challenges with control, I would just like literally read about it objectively in a couple different sources. I'm a big nerd. I'm a 1. I have the first line's the investigator. I have a veritable library in my apartment. So I took out a bunch of different copies of the gene keys. I read about it through the Kuan Yin, or the I Ching rather. So I grabbed my copy of the Kuan Yin. I read a couple different translations of the I Ching for hexagram 21. Then I grabbed my human design books. I did some Googling, and I basically tried to study objectively what is gate 21. And then I had like pages of notes. Then I went into the subjective. How have I experienced the themes that I read about? Control. When have I been too controlling, which is like the reactive shadow? When have I been too submissive and allowed myself to be controlled, which is the repressive shadow? When have I been in the gift of kind of self-authority? And I'm paraphrasing. I don't remember exactly what the gift is, but like it's something along that, just kind of having that balance, right? So when have I been in that? When has that been present? And then what is the city of this gift? How do I aspire to get into that energy? And what I also do for myself, and you're going to laugh, I have this thing called a city map where I have a list of all of my gates that I have activated and what the city and the gift are for each of them. And I use them as a mantra in my meditation. So every day I pick one that if I've been struggling with it lately, or I've been frustrated with it lately, I'm like, this is the thing I'm going to embody today. I'm going to look for, I'm going to actively observe of myself. And when I notice myself slipping into the shadow, like it's because it's at the front of my awareness, I can kind of quickly adjust. And so I always tell people, go slow, pick one at a time, observe yourself. If things don't come up right away, that you don't see your connection to the certain thing, but it's like, and what's cool is the sun and all of the planets are constantly transiting the gates in our chart. So things are going to come up in our life, just like we have the transits in astrology, where there are themes the collective is struggling with. There are themes that maybe you specifically are going to be working through. Those are great opportunities to practice as well. So
Beautiful.
it's
So
meant to
this is
kind
like,
of be cyclical.
yeah, like an embodied practice and very reflective practice. And to be honest, like reflection, self-awareness is always a key to change. And this is one of my last questions that I've got,
Yeah.
which is about this practical application of this, because we've been kind of on more of like a self-awareness, self-discovery tangent. However, a lot of people come to human design or gene keys through the medium of, a lot of people say, hey, this is how manifesting generator can make 7 figures or like all
Yeah.
that kind of side of things, where it's almost like it becomes like a hack for prosperity. And I'm sure that human design can help you become more prosperous. I feel
Yeah.
like when you're in alignment, there's a natural consequence that you're going to start attracting the right opportunities, the right client, etc., etc. But can you speak a little bit about it? Is it really, what's the application to our life, career, business? Is there
Yeah.
some kind of secret sauce in there? Because this seems to be.
It's funny because like I see some of the boom in human design right now. Like there used to be like myself, a couple other people on Instagram who were talking about it. Now every day there are more accounts popping up. And unfortunately, a lot of those accounts are, and again, everyone is entitled to practice this in the way that speaks to them. But I've noticed a lot of like old paradigm transmissions. Like, how do you have a month where you're scaling to 7 figures in 1 month? Like that's a need rooted in scarcity. That's like a belief you're not going to be taken care of. And so you need to manifest this number that's so massive that I mean, I can't imagine anyone needs 7 figures in 1 month as a matter of like, am I going to be taken care of? That's like abundance and beautiful. But like, I think human design in the new paradigm is like, how are we serving our communities? How are we all interrelated? I don't see it as a hack. I don't see it as a thing that like, oh, if you have this one gate, you're going to be good at blank, because energy is everything is interconnected. The way I personally like view my human design practice is, if I can be the most aligned, authentic version of myself that's walking in the gift in the city, then I am going to be happier. I'm going to have more peace. I'm going to have more abundance. I'm going to feel anchored in, and taken care of. And that in itself, that vibration of being in the 5D and not in the 3D is going to get me to those things. The miracles happen when you're in the fifth dimension, when you're in the 5D, right? It doesn't happen when you're in the 3D. And I think a lot of, or it's harder, I guess, to make manifest in the third dimension, right? Because it's anchored in the fear, the scarcity, the lack, the insecurity. So that it's really just changing your overall way of walking through the world. And it's not an easy overnight hack. Like even in human design, they say it takes 7 years to align to your chart. I always say throw that number out the window. It takes your entire lifetime. But it's a conscious, intentional choice you're making every day. It's not like if it always kind of drives me nuts when I see people say things like, I'm going to give you the codes to unlock your blank. It's like just knowing about it isn't enough to unlock it. You have to interrogate it, contemplate it, get honest with yourself about it, and maybe shift the way you've been behaving and make that become your new default behavior. It's like changing your baseline. So yeah, it does get presented a lot of times as like, I don't know. I just feel like that's part of the old paradigm falling away. Maybe that's your gateway drug into human design, but like I hope that through your interactions with it, you realize there is so much more that's actually more valuable to be, had in the chart.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for shedding so much light on human design. I know, I'm sure that our listeners know as well that this is a huge subject, like you say, to be studied for years. We're going to link up to your blog, which is full of great resources. But how can our listeners connect to you apart from the blog? Is blog the best place? Or
Yeah, so interiorcreature.com is my website. I teach classes in human design. I do one-on-one readings. I have a coaching container. I hate the word coaching. I have a thought partnership container. It's a community container where we're all kind of working together on that alignment practices. And I actually just launched a YouTube channel because I found that a lot of times I got really excited talking about something that takes me a little bit longer to write about. So every Friday I do a question and answer, an AMA with folks about their burning questions on human design, but everything is linked up via interiorcreature.com. And I'm at Interior Creature on Instagram. So those are probably YouTube, Instagram, and the website are probably the easiest places to find me. And I love to hear from folks. So like my inbox is always open if anyone has any questions or wonderings or just wants to nerd out in general.
Awesome. That's amazing. We're going to link up to all of that. Thank you so much, Jaclyn, for sharing your knowledge in such a beautiful, embodied, genuine way. And well, I look forward to my third reading with you. And guys, check out Interior Creature blog. It's like literally a mine of valuable knowledge. Thank you so much for being our guest, Jaclyn.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Architects of Destiny podcast. Be sure to subscribe and we will see you on the next episode.